More and more, we're talking about FX currencies, the strength of the dollar, because we are seeing that highlighted in so many of these earnings calls.
Yeah, I mean, people might be wondering, well, a strong dollar, isn't that great for America? Well, it could have a negative impact on large American corporates that have exposure around the world. And when you take a look at the Bank of America Fund Manager Survey, right, the long U.S. dollar remains the most crowded trade. That explains the massive rip higher that we've seen in the strength of the dollar index hitting the highest it's been since the early 2000s. And that is having a lot of ripple effects around the world as well, right? You take a look at some of the big companies like IBM pointing to their impact of Forex on their second quarter results, which they reported after the bell yesterday, noting that there's a serious headwind. And I think that might be thematic to a lot of the other large companies that we expect to see as we get deeper into the second quarter earnings.
Yeah, this is kind of commentary we've been anticipating. And obviously, we're focused on tech here because so many of these companies have exposure around the world. The currency headwinds more magnified when it comes to that as well. A few things to note here from IBM. We did hear from Jim Kavanaugh, the CFO, on the earnings call yesterday, really highlighting this, largely because that's the question he continued to keep getting on the FX impact. Number one, he said the rate and pace and breadth of the dollar's rise is unprecedented. Those were his words. He said the velocity of the strengthening is the sharpest that we have seen in over a decade. Specifically, he talked about how this is likely to weigh on free cash flow. They were guiding at 10 to 10.5 billion. Now he says that it's going to be at the lower end of the guidance. But that's going to continue to be a theme that we're going to hear on so many of these earnings calls, especially these tech names like a Microsoft that really warned in advance to say the strength of the dollar and the rate with which we've seen it go up is going to continue to weigh on the bottom line.
Yeah, and these are big differences that you see when you unpack the IBM earnings. And I think this is the lens by which we need to read future earnings as well. When you see revenue was up 9%, but if you actually control for the currency fluctuations over the course of that quarter between March and June, it actually was up 16%. And this is going to be a big story, I think, for not just the tech companies, but really any company that is
any multinational.
We might have to do a Yahoo U on this at some point in time. But really the big story here is that while a strong U.S. dollar is good for American buyers, right, if you're going to travel abroad, I mean, that euro parity is making a vacation to Spain look very nice. It means that foreign buyers of American goods that are denominated in U.S. dollar assets, it's going to get more expensive. And you do wonder whether or not that's not only going to impact the way that these earnings are reported, but demand going forward. Will certain foreign buyers start to say, I don't know if I can afford some of these, U.S. services in the tech industry or goods from U.S. exporters because of that currency fluctuation?
And you just take one company like IBM, just to give you some perspective on the exposure. Operating in 170 countries, dealing with 100 currencies. Obviously, they don't hedge against every one of those currencies. So that's something that it's increasingly going to complicate the picture. One more thing I do want to highlight from IBM's call specifically is the hit they took from their business exit out of Russia. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to hear about. They did exit that led to $100 million worth of free cash flow and profit. He said that's the cost in 2022. So just one more thing to watch here. IBM, yes, specifically, that stock is down in a big way, but this is not a story that's likely to be limited to IBM. We'll probably continue to hear the same themes throughout earnings season.